Our film opens with a true crime story, the disappearance of Elizabeth Smart, who was only 14 years old back in 2002. What made the case especially strange was that it took investigators an entire year just to find the first real lead and understand the kidnapper's motive, and to answer the terrifying question, was she even still alive? One of the most complicated aspects of the case was that the only witness was her younger sister, Mary Smart, who was just 9 years old at the time. Because of the trauma, she had almost completely blocked out what happened. To avoid spoiling the events, let's rewind all the way back to the beginning, with an interview that was done with Mary when she was still a child. During the interview, the host asked her if she wanted to say something to her sister. With total innocence, Mary said that she loved her very much and that the whole family was still searching for her. She couldn't understand why anyone would ever want to take her sister when Elizabeth hadn't done anything wrong. Then we jump to the present day. We see Mary as an adult, finally telling her story. She's clearly deeply affected, her eyes filled with tears, as she explains that she still hasn't been able to move on from that night. She tells us that she was sleeping in the same room as Elizabeth when it happened. Suddenly, a man entered their bedroom holding a gun. He told Elizabeth to come with him quietly, or he would kill her. The moment Mary opened her eyes and saw what was happening, she went into shock. She felt completely frozen, unable to move, unable to speak. Her entire body felt paralyzed. She closed her eyes again, hoping the man wouldn't notice her. By the time she finally found the courage to get up and run to her parents for help, the kidnapper had already taken her sister and vanished without a trace. The case completely shook the public. The news was everywhere. Elizabeth's disappearance was all anyone talked about. For her father, he remembers the exact moment, at 3:58 a.m., when Mary ran into his room, telling him that someone had entered their bedroom and taken her sister by force. At first, he thought it had to be a nightmare or some kind of hallucination. He searched the house frantically, room by room, hoping to find Elizabeth somewhere. That's when he noticed the kitchen window was open and the metal security grate had been cut. At that point, he had no choice but to call the police. The case was assigned to Detective Corey Lyman. When Lyman heard that a child had been taken so easily straight from her bedroom, he found it extremely unsettling. He began digging into every detail. He learned that Elizabeth was loved by everyone around her, was dedicated to her studies, and deeply passionate about music, especially playing instruments. Based on what he saw, his initial impression was that the case would be simple. He believed it could be solved within a couple of days at most. After all, the kitchen window was open, and there was a chair placed right next to it. Surely there had to be evidence somewhere. Around that time, news anchor Nasha became the first person to publicly speak about the incident. On the surface, the case didn't seem that complicated, but there was something deeply unsettling about it. The neighborhood itself was known for being wealthy, with carefully designed homes, and was considered extremely safe. Crime like this just wasn't supposed to happen there. When Elizabeth's uncle saw his brother shortly after the incident, he could immediately tell that he was completely emotionally drained, like someone who had just walked out of a battle. They were doing everything they possibly could to save her. About 8 hours after the incident, the police managed to set up a communications center to receive all tips related to the case. Nearly 40,000 reports came in from the general public, as the disappearance had become a major public issue. Of course, investigators went to her school to question her friends. They considered the possibility that she might have had a boyfriend who was involved because she was so loved by everyone around her. By around midday, almost the entire neighborhood had gathered to organize search patrols in the area and the surrounding neighborhoods, hoping that this would help move the investigation forward. Around that time, her father shared that they had moved to the neighborhood 6 years earlier and that his entire life was devoted to his children. He had 4 sons and 2 daughters, and Elizabeth was his first daughter. He loved her deeply because she had a competitive spirit and always wanted to achieve whatever she set her mind to, even with her siblings. By the second day after the incident, there was still no new information. This led her father to announce a $250,000 reward for anyone who could help find his daughter. At the same time, the media began paying even more attention to the case and increasing its coverage. This put additional pressure on the police, who now had to double their efforts to find her as quickly as possible and solve the case. But the core of the problem was that there were no witnesses at all, except for her 9-year-old sister. At that point, Mary was deeply traumatized. She was extremely attached to her sister and always tried to imitate her because she dreamed of growing up to be exactly like her. The idea that Elizabeth could suddenly disappear from her life was incredibly hard for her to process. Because the police were afraid that the pressure of everything that had happened might affect Mary's memories, they tried to interview her in a calm and quiet environment, hoping it would help her recall every detail clearly. At that time, she confirmed that she had heard the kidnapper's voice before, but she couldn't fully identify who he was. Her testimony led the police to start suspecting that the kidnapper might be someone from within the family, even though, from the outside, they appeared to be a happy family with no visible problems. The investigation began to uncover strange details beneath the surface. Naturally, the first people to fall under suspicion were her father and her brothers. During the investigation, police discovered that the home's alarm system had malfunctioned. At that point, they were forced to search the house more thoroughly. A police dog was brought in to track Elizabeth's scent around the area. The dog followed the trail into the forest next to the house, but suddenly stopped because the scent completely disappeared. This indicated that she had been picked up by a vehicle at that point. When this information was released to the media, public suspicion toward the family increased, especially toward her father. He was frequently appearing on television, crying without visible tears, which led many people to believe that he must have killed her and dumped her body somewhere to hide the evidence. Because of this growing suspicion, the police subjected him to a polygraph test to determine whether he was truly innocent or not. When her father learned from his wife that the police didn't believe his testimony and were suspecting that he had a role in what happened, he went into a state of shock. He broke down into hysterical crying, his entire body shaking. The idea that his daughter was still missing and that he was now being accused of harming her was terrifying to him. Because of this, his own father insisted on admitting him to a psychiatric hospital so he could calm down and regain stability. On the 6th day after the incident, the police were able to officially confirm the father's innocence. However, the problem remained that the polygraph results of her brothers were not conclusive enough to completely eliminate suspicion from them. We learn that Elizabeth's father had 3 brothers, and Tom was the one who stood out as the most troubled. He was always getting into serious problems. When he appeared on cameras and TV programs, he tended to ramble and over-explain things. At one point, he even said that it's completely normal for a brother not to like his sibling. On top of that, the tension in his voice was always noticeable. At that moment, Tom himself admitted that people had a reason to suspect him. With the things he said publicly, people either labeled him as crazy or accused him of being responsible for what happened to his sister. Even his wife, after the interview, frankly told him that unfortunately he had damaged the family's reputation. But he felt that the psychological pressure he had been under since hearing the news of Elizabeth's disappearance, whether from lack of sleep, searching everywhere, or worrying about her, was enough to make anyone break down and say strange things. When he took the polygraph test, he was also suffering from auditory hallucinations, which made the situation even more overwhelming. After a while, when the police finally announced that the entire family was innocent, most of the volunteers who had been helping with the case had lost motivation and stopped assisting. But Elizabeth's father and brothers continued searching everywhere, hoping to find her. Then suddenly, the police received a tip that a girl's body had been found in the forest, and they suspected that it might be Elizabeth. The problem was that the body was completely mutilated. There were no identifiable features because the kidnapper had used fire. After conducting tests, the police discovered that it was not Elizabeth, but another innocent victim of violent crimes. When her father heard the news, he felt a mix of relief and anxiety. Relieved that there was still hope she might be alive, but terrified thinking about what she might be going through, how she was surviving, and whether she could endure it. He also wondered if there was any chance she could return to a normal life, or if that possibility was gone entirely. On the 9th day of the case, Mary was left alone in the house to keep her away from all news about her sister, hoping that this would help her remember additional details. It was her only lifeline. Even though she was young, she understood everything that was happening. This caused her additional stress because she was constantly trying to remember every detail, just to figure out whose voice the kidnapper had. In addition, Mary was interviewed many times and even subjected to hypnosis, but it didn't help at all. At that point, Detective Corey started looking at things from a different angle. Since Mary was certain she had heard that person's voice before, it didn't necessarily mean it was someone from the family. It could have been someone from her father's colleagues or business partners who had entered the house. This is when a new suspect emerged. A man named Richard Reese, who had been one of the contractors Elizabeth's father worked with for a period of time and had been in their house multiple times. There had been several disputes over money between them. When the police arrested him and searched his house, they found a piece of jewelry that he had stolen from them. This increased the suspicion even further. When he was interrogated, his responses were very strange. He claimed that he hadn't even heard about the case, even though the neighborhood had been turned upside down for 2 weeks and everyone was talking about Elizabeth's disappearance. Among the evidence pointing toward him was that his last trip in his car covered over 200 kilometers, which was during the night of the incident or early the next morning. In addition, a credible witness reported that when Richard returned home, he had digging tools with him. This made the police start suspecting that he might have kidnapped Elizabeth and hidden her in a remote location to divert suspicion from himself. Meanwhile, Mary was still at home and banned from watching the news. By chance, she saw Richard's picture on TV and learned that the police suspected he was involved in her sister's disappearance. But she was certain he was innocent, and that he wasn't the person whose voice she had heard in the bedroom that night. Even though she explained this to the police multiple times, they insisted that she might be confused due to the trauma, since all the evidence seemed to revolve around him. 7 weeks after the incident, something happened that completely shifted the investigation. Someone tried to break into Elizabeth's aunt's house to kidnap her 18-year-old daughter. Of course, the kitchen window was open and the metal security grate had been cut. But this time, the criminal had left 2 chairs under the window, and the similarities between the events led the police to consider that the kidnapper might hold a grudge against the family itself and was attempting to take revenge through their children. At that time, the police were searching for any additional evidence to resolve the case. They offered Richard's lawyer a deal. If he admitted where he had been at the time of the incident and exactly how he used his car, even if it was in another crime, the most important thing was to avoid him harming anyone else, and he would receive complete immunity from punishment. However, they never got a response, because suddenly Richard suffered a stroke and died from it. At that point, the case became even more complicated, because the main suspect, the one who seemed to hold the answers to everything, had died, taking his secrets with him. Around that time, Elizabeth's father began to feel like he was losing hope. Then one night, he fell asleep thinking about her and had a dream where he saw her walking back home, as if everything had been resolved and life had returned to normal. That dream gave him the strength to keep trying until his very last breath. Around the same time, we are introduced to Gerard, the owner of a restaurant called Sound Like, which was known as one of the most popular places for hosting weekly parties, often involving drugs and illegal substances. One day, Gerard noticed 3 people entering the restaurant, a man accompanied by 2 girls. The man was dressed normally, while the 2 girls were wearing white robes. Their faces were completely covered with veils, with only their eyes visible. 4 months later, Mary was suffering from severe sleep problems because she still couldn't get over what had happened to her sister. She would grab any book and flip through it just to calm herself down. Suddenly, in a brief moment, a name came back to her. At that instant, she became certain that this person was the same man who had taken her sister from the bedroom on the night of the incident. We returned to Gerard again. That night, because he was so disturbed by the strange appearance of the man and the 2 girls, he tried to talk to them and offered to buy them drinks. The man refused. He said he could drink, but the girls absolutely could not. From the way he spoke, it was clear that he was extremely controlling and obsessed with himself. Gerard then jokingly asked the younger girl, "How do you put up with him? He seems really difficult." The other girl immediately answered instead of her, saying that he wasn't allowed to speak to her at all. At that moment, Gerard felt that they were crazy, so he walked away and left them alone. At this point, we discovered that the younger girl was Elizabeth, and that she was, thankfully, still alive. The story then takes us back to the night of the kidnapping, as Elizabeth begins to tell us what happened during all that time. She explains that she was 14 years old and very excited to finally be finishing middle school. All of her memories from that period were happy because of the loving family environment she grew up in, until the night of the incident. Suddenly, she found someone trying to force her out of her bedroom, warning her that if she made any sound, he would kill her and her family. Out of pure terror, she had no choice but to go with him. Inside, She kept praying that someone in her family would wake up and save her. But unfortunately, that never happened. She left the house with him walking behind her, pressing a gun into her back. All she could think about was wishing that if he planned to rape her or kill her, he would do it close to the house so her family could reach her quickly. But with cruel irony, he reassured her that he would do exactly that. Just not yet. They continued walking through the forest until they reached a tent. A woman dressed entirely in white came out. Her name was Hafsa. Without any warning, she hugged Elizabeth tightly, led her inside the tent, removed her shoes, and began washing her feet herself. When Elizabeth refused to take off the rest of her clothes, Hafsa threatened her. Either she obeyed, or she would call him from outside to deal with her by force. She then took all of Elizabeth's clothes, burned them, and gave her a white robe identical to the one she herself was wearing. At that moment, Elizabeth was completely terrified, fully convinced that this was the end, and that her life was about to be over. Elizabeth kept crying until suddenly she saw him enter the tent, telling her bluntly that their fates were now one and that she was his wife. Elizabeth lost control and shouted, "No!" at him, but he made it clear that if she screamed again, he would kill her. He even told her that if she felt she couldn't control herself, he could force her mouth shut. She tried to speak to him calmly, reasoning that what he was doing was illegal and that she was still a child and therefore couldn't be married. But he was completely obsessed, repeating that she was now his wife and that this was the right time to complete their marriage ceremony. Unfortunately, he assaulted her, and after it was over, he left her collapsed in the tent until she lost consciousness from exhaustion. After some time, she noticed Manuel bringing in all the missing persons posters with her picture, supposedly to reassure her that her family was still searching. But no one could reach her because she was with him. One day, she heard a distant voice calling her name in the forest. Before she could investigate, Manuel entered the tent carrying a sharp tool, warning her that any noise could result in the death of an innocent person trying to find her. She stayed still until the voice disappeared. During this period, he did nothing except assault her, and he would recite prayers for 45 minutes at a time, claiming it was divine orders. He even touched her inappropriately and restrained her with a collar around her neck like a dog. Hafsa encouraged him in all of this. The only thing that kept Elizabeth going was recalling her family memories and the warmth she had grown up with, which gave her a reason to hold on to life. Meanwhile, Mary remembered the kidnapper's voice and realized that Manuel was one of the homeless men who always preached doing good. He had been working with them during the time they were preparing the house. Even though Mary was certain it was him, the police didn't believe her, as there was no evidence linking him to the crime. Even when he worked at their house, he didn't finish his day and left without taking his pay. But since he was the only lead they had to follow up. A sketch artist was brought in to draw his face, but the police refused to release it publicly, fearing that if he really was the criminal, he might escape or harm Elizabeth further. Months passed until August, when Hafsa caused a serious problem with Manuel because he kept going into the city to get food he wanted, leaving them stranded in the forest. Due to her pressure, he was forced to take them with him to a restaurant called Salt Lake. This was Elizabeth's first real chance to escape or get someone's help. But her fear of what might happen if the plan failed always made her take a step back and wait. When they entered the city, she knew all the surrounding areas and understood exactly how far she was from home. Running would have been easy, but her terror controlled every part of her. She felt like her body was moving on autopilot while her mind existed in a parallel world. They went to a library to look at a map, and by coincidence, an officer arrived to investigate because he suspected the young girl might be Elizabeth. He repeatedly asked her to remove her veil, but Manuel insisted that it was impossible because it went against their religious beliefs. She tried to call for help, but Hafsa pressed her legs to silence her. In the end, the officer accepted Manuel's explanation and left, and Elizabeth's chance to be rescued failed again. Manuel then hurried them back to the mountains, not trusting what could happen at any moment. With every step Elizabeth took with them, she felt her chances of survival shrinking and feared she would never see her family again. By December, her family was celebrating Christmas, trying to appear composed. For Mary, the biggest fear was that she might never see her sister again. At that time, Detective Corey was promoted to a different city, leaving the case. Obsessed with finding Elizabeth, he would wait until he could return home to review every detail of the incident from the beginning, hoping some clue might have been overlooked. Meanwhile, Elizabeth's father had reached his limit. 8 months had passed with no useful information. He decided to go on a program to publicly announce Manuel's picture, hoping that a single tip from anyone could open new leads. A few days after the interview, he received a call from someone who personally knew Manuel. Since seeing the sketch, they were certain he might be the man who kidnapped Elizabeth, because all his behaviors were suspicious and capable of harming a young girl. They also discovered that he had a tent, but no one knew its exact location. He sent them a picture and revealed that his real name was Brian David. When investigators followed him, they discovered he had previously been arrested for stealing from a supermarket. He always wore a white robe, and his appearance was distinctive. Her uncle recognized him from the photos, as he had seen him on the street begging with a woman in white covering her face and holding a doll, the woman who would become his wife. They had no fixed place to live, as they were convinced they had a religious mission to spread their beliefs. Meanwhile, his ex-wife tried to contact Elizabeth's uncle, warning him that he was a psychopath, and explaining that their divorce had occurred after she noticed his increasingly abnormal behavior. For example, he once put rats in a trap to harm them and had made numerous attempts to abuse children. After some time, they received a call from the Salt Lake restaurant because when they checked the news and reviewed the surveillance cameras, they confirmed that the girl with him was indeed Elizabeth. This was almost the first real hope that she was still alive, but it also increased their anxiety because they couldn't imagine what she might be going through with someone like him. By March 2003, about 9 months after the incident, they were in San Diego. Throughout all this, the hardest part for Elizabeth was that he spent almost the entire day talking about himself, how much he sacrificed, and all the things he did for his faith, even when he didn't want to. On top of that, he kept thinking about what their next move would be and which city they should go to. Elizabeth realized that she had to do everything she could to save herself. She decided to play along in the way he liked, sensing signs that they were supposed to return to her city. But ultimately, the decision was his, because he was the only one who could confirm whether her instinct was correct. He trusted her completely. With full confidence, he told her, "You are finally part of my family, a piece of us," and agreed that they would return. As soon as they entered the city, someone spotted them and immediately filed a report. Suddenly, halfway through their route, police cars surrounded them from all sides. Since he had her wearing a wig and hiding her face, the officer couldn't immediately identify her. He took her aside, away from him, trying to speak to her. Sensing her fear, he reassured her that if she really was Elizabeth, they were all waiting for her. During all those months, they had been searching for her, but she couldn't respond because the idea of Manuel being around terrified her. The officer, understanding the situation, asked her at least to nod if she really was Elizabeth. Once she gave him the signal, he quickly placed her in the car and arrested them. At the same time, her father received a call from the center, telling him to drop everything and come immediately because they had found his daughter. When he saw her in the office, he couldn't believe it was really her. She looked so different from the little girl who had been living with him for the past year. He hugged her tightly, trying to comfort her as much as he could. Of course, her return brought immense joy to everyone, especially her family. For Elizabeth personally, being in multiple safe places helped her realize that what had happened to her didn't diminish her in any way. On the contrary, it proved how strong she was and that she had survived experiences that no one else could endure. Detective Corey was overjoyed at her safe return and decided to go to the city himself to see the tent where she had been kept. What affected him most was that they hadn't been able to rescue her earlier. As for the criminal, he deliberately acted insane so he could be confined in a psychiatric facility, and the case was effectively stalled. The trial was delayed for over a year because of his behavior. But Elizabeth was determined to get justice for what she had endured, physically and mentally. She spent a long time gathering the courage to face him in court. Finally, in 2010, she succeeded. The court sentenced him to life imprisonment, while the woman who had been with him received 15 years. Afterward, Elizabeth often reflected on how her life would have been if she hadn't survived all of this, living a normal life, falling in love, marrying, and having a family. Surprisingly, she managed to do that, and over time, she also used her experience to inspire the people around her. If you enjoyed the movie summary, subscribe to the channel and hit the bell icon to get all the latest updates.